No one should be exclaiming, "We're so back," in response to Payday 3's 7th update, finally changing the course on its hotly debated progression system. It has yet to earn that right. However, what this update is an inflection point for Payday 3. From here the game goes in one of two directions, to the scrap heap with Redfall, or the promised land of Cyberpunk. It perfectly encapsulates where Payday 3 stands a couple of months into Operation Medic Bag. An enjoyable core that promises the world, delivers on some aspects but then stumbles on its own lack of cohesion. I was wrong about Payday 3 pre-launch, but that doesn't mean I don't still see potential in the game, and in places that potential is finally being realised. We're getting some seeds of build variety, some new mechanics to stretch the difficulty, and a more consistent and rewarding progression system that does an infinitely better job of matching your efforts on the heist to the bounty you receive. But it feels like there's so much still to be done before it's truly worth your time and attention. I'm slightly baffled by the design choices around certain skills, which end up just filling slots, and loud modifiers, whilst occasionally compelling, haven't managed to address any of the difficulty issues they set out to, which leaves us perfectly poised before DLC 2 and Boys in Blue. Undoubtedly, Payday 3 is in the best state it has ever been, and Update 7 plays no small part in that. But these vestiges of a good game that are now springing up need a lot more meat behind them before I'll be cancelling my weekend plans for any DLCs. To put it in terms Payday players should understand, we're edging our way there, one slightly clumsy stroke at a time. Anyway, let's delve into the content of this patch, starting of course with the progression changes. Oh, but just quickly, fair warning, we haven't seen complete patch notes yet, so a few things might still be omitted. For example, once again the animation squad has turned up with new interactions when throwing bags, pulling levers and opening panels, which are always good to see but might not be noticed at a glance. What you can't miss though are the now highly restructured challenge pages, with only a small fraction of level progress rewards and noteworthy challenges remaining. On one hand, this is a great relief, as challenge-based progression just didn't work for the Payday community. It forced weapon kill farming in bathrooms, which is a strategy I'm proud to retire, or overly repetitive heist grinds, especially at higher levels. Not to mention, it had a mess of a UI, making it almost impossible to track even if you didn't mind the premise. On the other, it seems a shame not to at least keep these challenges in the game, even if they no longer rewarded IP, as many in the community spent hours grinding them out, only to have their impressive achievements scrubbed clear, and now it might feel like there's less of an endgame for hardcore players. As we understand, this is open to community feedback on how the old challenge system can be reused and revamped, so not all is lost, but it does feel like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to go from one extreme to another. Fortunately, pure XP progression feels fantastic now, especially at higher levels. Prior to Update 7, progression used to be very front-loaded as you started off quickly, unlocking challenges with so many to passively run through without needing to vary up your gameplay. Around level 60 this started to slow as your challenge pool dwindled, and at least at launch you started to hit a point where you could complete entire heists without earning a jot of XP. So to avoid punishing new players, the updated system is roughly balanced around the XP earning rate you'd earn at level 1, meaning for higher levels you'll be witnessing completion numbers you won't have seen in hundreds of hours of gameplay. All heists now have loud or stealth bonuses depending on what the devs view as more challenging, alongside newly recalculated all loot bonuses. That's not all though, as each stolen bag now rewards heist XP just like Payday 2, which varies from heist to heist, and even loot bag to loot bag, as now you'll get more for a clean bag on dirty ice than a regular one. This bespoke system is a massive improvement, and whilst I'm not sure they're quite there with the balance just yet, for right now just seeing big numbers go up is going to be enough to get more than a few community members excited to grind more of the game, even if it's still fundamentally repetitive. For comparison's sake, the classic Rock the Cradle stealth speedrun used to offer 90 IP per run, plus any earned challenges, which is now a whopping 483 with just one extra bag secured. That's over 5 times as much and about 200 IP per minute. It gets even crazier though, as an Overkill All Loot Golden Shark now offers over 2,300 IP in Loud, which is roughly 10 times what we're used to. For comparison of Loud versus Stealth, a quick and dirty, silent, all bags no rest for the wicked earns us 1,910 IP, whereas Loud offers an extra 200 flat bonus, landing at 2,110. I'd say that's a fair appraisal of which approach is harder and more time consuming, being rewarded appropriately. In all honesty, I think this bespoke system might be the best we've ever had, even in Payday 2, which ended up being very abusable back in the day, and whilst I'm not sure it's perfectly balanced right now, the overall system is a step up at first glance. That's obviously the most major change in this update, but there's a whole lot more for us to get into, starting with the addition of 6 new loud heist modifiers and 2 new stealth ones. I covered these in full in a not particularly positive video a few weeks ago, so I won't be going into extreme detail on each, but just know that I still stand by my concerns at the time that these are really aimed at problems that don't exist or are not overly impactful at this stage. The armor piercing effect was reduced down to only 5% of damage received, but even if it was only 1%, I think it would remain annoying. It was designed to punish armor builds, which is ironic when most players are running around with adrenaline, so despite being relatively low impact and not worth avoiding, it still feels a little redundant. Flashbang shields are an interesting addition. They're very distinct, emitting a red glow that can be seen from afar whilst making unique noises as they approach. They provide a little disruption at times, and will absolutely obliterate your vision in a carelessly sensory overloading fashion if given the chance, but trust me when I say you have to try to get hit by the full-on flashbang effect. They give you so much time to just shoot them in the head. Permanent custody without trading is a little antithetical to Payday 3's updated hostage system, so I'm not sure I conceptually like its soft locking potential, but it's really not so bad if you're playing to avoid custody anyway. For clarification, the game is still bloody easy, with very little of note being nerfed. Heavy SWAT spawning from the start of the heist can be nasty without a powerful build. The SA still makes short work of them, but with the cutting shot changes I'm about to get onto, they can be tricky to contend with and offer a slightly unique challenge. Specials being able to remove edge, grit and rush don't really do much, especially when the techie just got a tool that can do that on steroids. And finally, the buddy system, which raises the special cap and allows the simultaneous spawn of special types, is comfortably the best and most interesting modifier. It can lead to tricky situations as you face down multiple dozers or get blindsided by a second grenadier, but feels fair and simply encourages better play from your squad. In its almost boring simplicity, it somehow ends up at the top of the pile. Overall, the loud modifiers weren't the net negative I was worried they might be, but they're certainly not perfect in how they change up the game. If anything, the problem was that they were often barely noticeable. Currently, they're on a 2-week rotation, with likely plans to speed that up rather than force heist to stagnate, but I wonder if they'd be better off ramped up but left as optional tick box difficulties like One Down was to Payday 2, allowing you to opt into the bonus challenge for greater reward instead of being pervasive nuisances on isolated heists. As for the new stealth modifiers, joining the ones we already have, threat detection feels like a fairly underbaked concept. Basically, it allows cameras to be more perceptive of you even in public areas, instantly sounding the alarm if you're spotted even whilst in casing mode. This sounds annoying, but it's trivialized by the grifter skill line, and it's easy access to rush, which is where I really have a problem with it. I don't think you should be locked into a specific skill line and style of play to deal with an individual modifier. It should instead be circumventable by raw stealthing skill, which simply isn't the case for threat detection. Finally, for the modifiers, we have AI surveillance, which is a cool concept, making it impossible to take down chems directly, as there will be no guard in the security room. This means you'll just need to deal with the cameras being up at all times, or take them out for once, which is a nice subversion of how most of us play stealth. It's unfortunately useless on certain heists like Turbid Station, which already doesn't have a camera room, which is probably a bit of an oversight, but still a solid 7 out of 10 from me. Back onto the loud gameplay, the dreaded techie is getting the full rollout treatment across all heists. Not only will she spawn in on them, she's got a new secondary drone to toss out that has the potential to briefly flash you and remove access to edge, grit and rush buffs for 20 seconds. Now, before I go any further, I don't like this conceptually. Like all Loathsome, edge, grit and rush are the cornerstones of almost every skill in the game and hold together your builds. Taking them away from you, even if only briefly, strikes me as very anti-fun game design. I'd much rather face down something buffing my foes than neutering me, as that feels like an innate attack on the enjoyability of the gameplay. However, this drone, much like the flash shield in this update, is very sluggish in performing its debuff. If it catches you unprepared, it can be game over, but otherwise it's very easy to take out before it flashes you and disables your buffs. I also think its capacity to hack sentries is cool, although I haven't seen that in action. It's a shame to be positive about a new addition being low impact, but that's because I worry its impact can only be negative on the gameplay, even if I do commend what it's going for conceptually. Regardless of this, the techie's other drone is still a fairly well balanced nuisance that forces you to look skyward and varies up the gameplay sufficiently. Their flight pathing functions far better than I expected, and techie's new hiding spots genuinely catch you off guard. They don't spawn too often to get frustrating, but provide more of a Captain Winters level of challenge across the duration of a heist instead of one go. I was anticipating a dumpster fire with massive clipping problems and endless hide and seek matches, but this has gone much better than expected. Overall, despite my few complaints, it's a fairly top-notch implementation of a not entirely popular enemy unit. The old Payday 3 dichotomy, the good with the bad. But up next, that dichotomy gets even more pronounced. I don't like Payday 3's skill system. At first I was on the fence, but now I think it's just as flawed as progression once was, and this update hasn't done much to make me think otherwise, and that's despite some really solid additions. Assassin, the new skill line, is conceptually cool, but in practice, very gimmicky. It has a few solid skills, starting with the base assassin skill itself. Simply by dropping a suppressor on any weapon, which I tend to do anyway, you will gain rush by picking up a kill. This feels like a top tier one of, if just to passively increase your movement speed around heist, being one of the most accessible and immediate ways to activate the skill. The movement speed buff is nice enough, but it's also a passive buff to any skills in the game that require rush to activate, making it a highly splashable option in almost any build. Its aced version on the other hand is much more situational. This refreshes rush but doesn't activate it whenever you manually mark an enemy. It's a bit too fiddly for loud but is a fine rush resetter in stealth, although I wouldn't call it a must-have. Up next, skimming the ground is a 20% movement speed buff when crouched with a suppressed weapon equipped. Again, this is a stealth focused skill, and whilst a fine buff in theory, most serious stealth players move and slide quicker than they would simply crouching around, so it'll end up as an easy skip I expect. Duck and Weave grants you a 25% damage bonus when shooting enemies from behind with Rush active. This is a chunky damage boost that is uniquely tied to Rush instead of Edge, but it's so situational and awkward to use, I don't see it getting a lot of play. Also, this buff is diminished by 5% for every additional armor chunk you have after your first, which seems like more overbalancing for a meta that no longer exists. I like the concept in theory, but in practice cops seldom offer up an opportunity to shoot them in the rear, and even if they did, surely you want bonus damage to kill active threats faster, not poor fellas assuming the position and posing you no danger. It's all a little misguided in my opinion. Killer Kinesthetics is a combo skill which sounds interesting. Killing a marked enemy will result in another enemy within 10 meters being marked instead, allowing you to keep chaining marks together. This has skill synergy, but if I'm being honest, is a little tricky to get working, as soon as you break the chain it's a nightmare to get up and running again. If you didn't have to mark the initial enemy, this skill would feel a lot better to use and probably still not be too powerful, but essentially it exists to facilitate the playstyle of the next skill, Assassin's Metal. This states that if you have no armor, every kill on a marked enemy with a suppressed weapon will restore 10 health. Like Grinder from Payday 2, this effect will be stronger on lower difficulties, but unfortunately on Overkill, 10 health per kill just doesn't feel like enough to play a true health drain style, especially when it requires you to forego armor and has such a long list of stipulations to make work. Again, it's pure micromanagement that's just not worth it most of the time. Take this as a luxury option within Fortitude builds, but build around it at your peril. Which just leaves us with Death Knell, a simple mastery skill that allows you to mark all enemies within the range of your throwable. This thing is actually very interesting. It works unbelievably well with smoke, given its huge radius, but can comfortably be run alongside things like Shock Grenade for a more aggressive playstyle, especially now that Expose works with shocks too. Just watch out because you can now briefly stun yourself with your own grenade, making it harder to just throw them at your feet. Anyway, the idea is for you to mark as many enemies as possible to make use of skills like Assassin's Metal, which is fine, but I found it really excelled with the once useless Strategist skill line. Finally, all the half-baked ideas at launch now mean something, as just by dropping smokes around the map, not only will you have perfect vision on all spawns and special units, with Edge you'll deal an extra 20% damage towards marked enemies, with Grit you'll take an extra 20% less yourself, and with Rush you'll gain 20% dodge against them, as Misdirect has been mercifully buffed in this patch. What was once a laughingstock is now an almost cohesive playstyle, with smokes themselves also getting a massive use case buff as a result. Overall, despite Base Assassin and Death Knell having their uses, the line as a whole is a little all over the place. Is it a stealth line? Is it a suppressor line? Is it a marked enemy line? Who knows? I find skill trees tend to perform better when they're consolidated and focused around a single idea, like Transporter and Fortitude, so despite its cool intent, I don't expect this line to be used much outside of a few niche and fun skill applications. Another divisive change was made to the skill Cutting Shot. This thing was massively buffed out of the blue a couple of patches ago, and has now been hit with the full-on nerf hammer. It's been changed alongside Precision Shot, which has also received a soft nerf, so that it only offers the enemy penetration aspect of old Precision Shot without the original armor pen. Now, Precision Shot only offers the scope damage multiplier, which by the way is still incredibly powerful, making the SAA-144 my outright pick for the best weapon in the game, and instead, Cutting Shot's old flat armor penetration buff is held by High Grain, but will only be active, admittedly for the entire team, for 30 seconds after interacting with placed ammo bags. This is obviously a big hit to Cutting Shot, which I'll be outright avoiding now, and a solid buff to High Grain, as with throwables also getting better this patch, maybe teams will start to run ammo more often, although I doubt it as survivability will always be king with how Payday 3 is designed. I'm also not sure it should operate on a timer as it pigeonholes you into using resources when you might not need to, but it's certainly more viable than it once was. As for how this has impacted the health of the game, I expect the weapon meta will default back to where it was at launch, with the VF7S and SA reigning supreme as major one-shot weapons, whilst the Castigo has fallen off after losing its easy one-shot potential, meaning the Bison takes its place as the best secondary. Other weapons will still be viable, but with Armor Pen being hard to come by consistently now, they will be seen less. Finally, from a gameplay perspective, we've received new Heister VA and cop animations. I didn't notice much of this during the heists I played in early access, although I believe Shade has a few more lines I'd never heard before. It's all moving the game in a positive direction, but won't be setting the world on fire. Sadly, the cross-Heister banter still isn't in. Moving into the menus, we're finally getting the start of the new Mask of the Week system, adding a new mask into rotation every week at a discounted price from a pool of genuinely fantastic designs. I'm not sure it's worth a return of the old show just yet, but I like the concept, they're top quality models, and I suppose it encourages players to log on more frequently, which is another key aspect of player retention. Right now you can purchase the highly requested waifu mask for just 100 C-stacks, complete with jiggling ponytails, and with complete customizability, finally allowing us to get close to the Payday 2 creations of old. Mask designing still needs work, but this is a very solid step in the right direction. And of course you can grind Infamy for a total of 3 new consumable spray paint patterns with 10 colour variations each to really work on both unique mask and weapon designs, which are a smart addition to get most heisters back on the leveling train. But of course, more important than any of these aforementioned additions, we have a new Wi-Fi circle completion sound. It's revolutionary, it's game changing, all those negative feelings you had towards circle hacks vanishing in a single ding. And with that farcical statement out of the way, it's time to wrap up this video. Payday 3 is still held back by a few of its core systems, most of which I believe need fully reconsidering once Operation Medit Bag is complete. But until then, I understand that the focus has to be on functionality and expanding the game's pool of content. Update 7 does a decent job of that, in fact in places it does so exceptionally, but it always feels like we're rolling with the punches even when things start to luck up, and I can't help but think there's a lot of wasted potential in the new skill line and modifier system. I'm just hoping that the massive progression overhaul is enough to balance it all out. That said, remember to check out Apex Gaming PCs, just a few more days of that May discount to take advantage of when making any purchase via my link below across the entire range. Thank you so much for watching, enjoy Update Day, and that waft of optimism passing you by. This could just be the start of a great redemption, but I'm not a gambling man. Take care, see you in the next one. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.